Hello, everybody. This is Frank. It is Thursday, February 12th, 3:05 p.m. A little late for us. Sorry. But the world is changing when, of course, we have frenemies like the United Kingdom and most of Europe and NATO and things like that are out there. They want to sort of get things from us, but then they also want to trip us up. And have done so for quite some time, depending on who you hear. Britain has tried to sabotage everything we've been involved in since the beginning, or somewhere around World War One. But we'll lay off of that for now. That's some other organization's story to tell, not mine, and not anybody here in the office. But we cannot allow those limey devils to sit there and badmouth the United States of America, which we have seen in a recent article from the Chatham House. Now, those of you who do not know who the Chatham House is, the Chatham House is a quaint English organization called the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which is also known as the Chatham House. It is the English version of the Council on Foreign Affairs in the United States. Various conspiracy theories swirl around it. It was associated usually with the British Foreign Office and MI6 and a bunch of other really cute players like that. But they've just recently put out an article, and I'll include the link somewhere in here, uh, and talking about Cuba. And I'm just going to say, read the article. We were going to rebut the article. Normally, this is something that you would see done at a different level, but Chatham House is right on, kind of on par with us, so we can deal with this more in our way. So we're going to put our attention to a recent Cuban analysis produced by Chatham House, because as you know, Cuba is very much in play at the moment, regardless of what people tell you. And that venerable London institution of international affairs, whose tone is measured, whose prose is polished, and whose conclusions deserve rather closer scrutiny. We were not a little taken aback by certain assertions advanced in that report. And so, in the spirit of civilized disagreement, we feel it incumbent upon ourselves to set down the matter as we understand it plainly and without theatrical flourish or the use of highbrow received pronunciation English. Because what is presented as sober realism may, in fact, be rather something more convenient. And the report states, it's almost, as we would say, almost breezily, if one were to still be working at Condé Nast, that Cuba does not represent a national security threat to the United States. Now, that is a serious claim. Cuba sits 90 miles from Florida. It has long-standing intelligence relationships with Russia and to some extent with the Chinese. Open source reporting, including photographs, and U.S. congressional hearings have addressed Chinese signal intelligence activity on the island. 5 locations. One need not indulge in Cold War melodrama to observe that hosting foreign surveillance facilities in close proximity to the continental United States is, at the minimum, a matter of strategic interest. A nation need not field tank divisions, as we would say, to constitute a security concern. It is enough to host listening posts and various other spies and idiots that close to our border to make one think about what's going on in Cuba. Now, to wave that away as irrelevant is not analysis, it is a selection. It is selection. Okay. The report implies gently but unmistakably that Cuba's agricultural collapse is fundamentally the result of the American embargo. We can examine that. Cuba traded freely with the Soviet Union for decades, with Canada up until right now, the European Union, China, and most of Latin America under COMECON, however you want to say it. I never understand these things. Cuba enjoyed preferential oil for sugar arrangements. Yet sugar, And they have this deal with the sugar. Yet sugar production declined. They shut mills down. Livestock numbers collapsed. Food imports rose. Since 2000, if those of you who want to win bar bets, under the Trade Sanctions Reform and Export Enhancement Act, U.S. agricultural goods have been legally sold to Cuba on a cash basis, and the United States has frequently ranked among Cuba's major food suppliers. Without us, they would starve. They would have starved for 26 years. So we must ask ourselves, if the embargo explains the collapse, and how does one account for access to the global markets, which they've had, preferential Soviet trade, U.S. food exports continuing under lawful exemption? The more proximate causes are well documented: state procurement controls, price distortions, fuel shortages, currency dysfunction, chronic underinvestment. Export markets matter only if there is competitive output to export. The production collapsed first. Okay? That great central planning, as we say in the communist world. The report notes that Cuba has managed to attract foreign investment in tourism almost as if there was an inexplicable contradiction here, which there is not. We've just talked about that. Cuba's tourism sector is heavily intertwined with military linked conglomerates. The Cuban S2 are wily little devils. That's all we can say in this particular moment without fear of our car blowing up. Hard currency flows through structures controlled by the regime. Scarcity, meanwhile, is socialized. Okay? The hotels receive the investments, grocery shelves receive the shortages. This is not an economic reform, it is selective channeling of revenue to preserve political control. Finally, the piece suggests that U.S. pressure on Cuba is largely ideological. It is a hangover from the Cold War. We are fulfilling John F. Kennedy's dreams, blah, 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 Bay of Pigs, blah, blah, blah. Yet the immediate pressure, I'm sorry, under discussion is energy. You go and look online right now and you see what they're talking about. Venezuelan oil shipments, fuel shortages, blackouts, migration pressures. It's not nostalgia. That is leverage. One may debate whether it is a wise policy. One may debate its humanitarian implications. But to reduce it to ideological spite is to mischaracterize the mechanism entirely. So Chatham House remains a respected institution. It's very high end, very Oxford, Cambridge, that type of all that good stuff. But even respected institutions may fall into the comfort of drawing room consensus. So I feel I haven't read the article myself and contributed to this, particularly when dealing with regimes that have survived long enough to appear permanent. Cuba's tragedy is neither entirely external nor entirely internal. Their sanctions constrained it, policy mismanagement crippled it, security partners complicated it, and to suggest otherwise, to tidy the narrative into something ideologically neat, is to understate both the complexity and the stakes. We were startled by that presentation because they're like, well, there's no oil. Why would anybody want to? Why are the Americans involved? Because there's no oil. What a third grade bullshit thing to say when we have all these other variables that we're discussing, right? And my aside for this is if you just look up the damage that the Cuban government's intelligence forces, the S2, have done in Central, South America, and Africa, you can see why this government has to go. They are more than happy to continue the way they continue because they are always going to eat well. The people are just there. They die, they die, they live, they live. Nobody really cares. It is a lockdown. And that would be happening if they were given ham sandwiches every day or if they were not given ham sandwiches every day. The lockdown was Castro's devising, especially Raul, from what I understand. Raul is really the guy who got into that stuff. So that's where we stand. Not such a great thing, but when you see Chatham putting something out like this, that means the idiots in EU are, especially in the United Kingdom, possibly elsewhere where English is still pushed around, maybe the Germans and a couple of other countries are going to say, "Hey, look, it's another war for oil. It doesn't make sense. Why would Trump do it?" Well, it has to be done, and it's going to be done. We did an article on what should be done and how it should be handled, and that is going to be the make or break because if he is going to go forward and do the job on this place, the first thing is you've noticed that they keep talking about. There's a couple things, and we'll just end with this because this has to be a whole other video. There's a disinformation video going around that the Americans have picked five people that they want to run Cuba for them. Two of them run United Crystals or whichever other company it is up in Belglades. And both of them are, I can't say monsters because I'll get sued, but they are both involved in trying to suppress free speech in the state of Florida on a daily basis. They are also both involved in a rock mining situation. If you go to captainsforclearwater.com and look at that, they have the most honest version of it, which will pollute our water supply. So if you were going to have a guys like this, just because they're Cuban and billionaires, I can see why they had the revolution. I will say that any day of the week. If this is how they acted down on the island, who the fuck? I don't even want them in Florida. Who the fuck wants them back there, right? Excuse my language. We were trying to stay high tuned, but it wouldn't make any sense. So people who see those names and don't know the story behind any of the names of any of the people that are on that list need to go and spend 35 seconds and go to even Wikipedia. Put the name in and then write scandal after it and see what comes up. Okay? These guys in most cases are Republicans because they hate Castro and communism. They would be Bolsheviks if they could get it back at Castro. We have discussed like I said, past papers, one you can find online very easily. That's not going to be that way. Has to be done a certain way because we are going to have it done. If it gets done, it's getting done before the midterm. Venezuela turns itself around. The president, whatever her name is at the moment, she's been invited to Washington. That's not so we can take her out back and shoot her in the head. That's to let her know if you want to live, if you've ever seen the movie Sicario where they have the police officer in the back seat and they're torturing him, she's going to get the back seat without the torture because she has to decide how she's going to live the rest of her life and how long it's going to be because she's already on the list in the United States. She has warrants out for her and everything else. People don't realize that the foreigners just run off at their mouth about the shit that we do. They don't look at any of that stuff. It's just they may as well have gone to Vassar or Columbia with these other idiots. But anyway, Chatham, disappointed, not disappointed. I can understand where this is going, which is going to be a pivot with the UK on a lot of things dealing with the Americans. And they should feel left out because I think that we're going to find evidence bearing out the fact that they have not been our friends as much as people thought they should be. They were trying to always be the smarter older cousin, right? And we were just the dumb cousin with money. But we'll see how that all plays out. So anyway, that's all for now. Chatham House in general is not bad. You could read their articles if you like. They're online. They have their own website. Throw it through the truth meter. And like I said, they have done decent work in the past. If you're not on their bad side, you'll probably get a good, fair article out of it. So with that note, have a nice day, and I will talk to you later on.